Story. The NPA, of course, are dropping charges against Finance Minister Pravin Gordhan, Oupa Magashule and Ivan Pillay. Our reporter Karyn Maughan was at that press briefing a short while ago and joins us now live. Karyn, I think the one thing that many people are talking about is that Shaun Abrahams says he has nothing to be sorry about.
Well, essentially, he was asked whether his tenure as the head of the NPA had done damage to the institution, and a number of questions on this issue of accountability for a decision which manifestly was very, very bad in law and based on very little to no evidence. Now, he's, of course, reiterated the fact that under the NPA Act, it was not his decision. It was made by Dr. Tory Pretorius and Advocate Mzimyati, and that he was only brought in to review that decision and ultimately seeking, one would argue, to distance himself from it as much as possible. I'm now saying that in light of clear evidence that there was no criminal intent on behalf of the individuals implicated in this so-called fraud, that he decided not to pursue the prosecution.
Now, it's hard for many people watching at home, including many of us in the newsroom, to understand why then he was so brave enough and confident enough to make the announcement that they did receive summonses over this and that there was going to be charges pursued in this matter, only to come back a couple of weeks later saying, actually, I've reviewed it and I don't think it should go to court.
Well, I mean, Shahan, we all remember those lines about the days of disrespecting the NPA are over. And this very strong, and one may argue, sort of, borderline arrogant demeanor that he took on in that press conference, being quite obviously irritated by the questions of journalists and being quite obviously irritated by questions about why he had chosen to pursue the finance minister over 1.1 million rand, which he had not himself benefited from in any way, when in fact there were the 783 charges looming against the president, and a court had said the decision not to prosecute was irrational. So I think those questions from the public are valid. I think as much as the NPA at this point is trying to reiterate that it is an independent organization, at best for it, it has shown itself to be massively incompetent. We know that the documentations demonstrating that the people involved in this whole situation had sought and obtained legal advice, saying quite categorically that granting Ivan Pillay early retirement was not illegal, somehow never ever was brought to the attention of the prosecutors. And given the individuals involved, given the repercussions for the economy and the country, it is simply unbelievable that basic investigation wasn't done into this issue until the very, very last moment, when Oupa Magashule and Ivan Pillay sought a review of the decision to prosecute, and we now sit with the case being withdrawn.
Now, given that their names have been dragged in the mud over this, do they have any legal recourse against the NPA for doing that?
Absolutely. They are fully within their rights to institute a malicious, a case of wrongful and malicious prosecution against the National Prosecuting Authority. We know that the NPA faces a number of these cases every year. I mean, one really has to see at this point what the response of these individuals will be, given that there was documentation from 2009, Shahan, showing that their own legal advisors, in fact, said that this was completely above board. And given that even today, the head of the NPA doesn't appear to understand that the legislation governing human resources processes in SARS is not the same legislation that governs these processes in other institutions, and is still quoting a law that is simply not applicable. Even more bizarre is the fact that at one point towards the end of the briefing, Shaun Abrahams suggested that if there had been, quote unquote, a greater deal of cooperation between these accused individuals, who, as you rightly point out, have had their names dragged through the mud, and the Hawks, there may well not have been a prosecution. And so, in a perverse way, attempting to, quote unquote, victim blame the very same individuals who had provided, at least in Pravin Gordhan's case, at least 27 answers to the Hawks, multiple documents, multiple inputs on this issue throughout this so-called rogue unit investigation, but clearly not good enough for Shaun Abrahams, who has apparently attempted in some way to blame this whole debacle on the minister and his co-accused.
Now, Karyn, given that Shaun Abrahams does not see that he should resign over this issue, can the president step in and say, you messed up, it's time to leave?
Well, essentially that can only happen, the president can only suspend him and then institute an inquiry into his fitness to hold office. But I think one would very much doubt that that is going to happen. What is more plausible is in fact that an entity or a body or an individual can go to the General Counsel of the Bar and say he is simply not fit to practice as an advocate. He has shown a profound level of negligence in his handling of this case. And though this decision may have been made or taken on his version by other people, he ultimately has the accountability of being the head of the NPA, and he ultimately has to take responsibility where legally baseless and unsound decisions are taken that have clear and probable dangerous repercussions for the economy. I mean, the reality is that the markets depend on a notion of stability in institutions in order to deem an environment favorable to investment. The country is looking at a possible downgrade in financial status in the face. And the fact that the National Prosecuting Authority saw it fit to just a few weeks ago institute a case that had absolutely no basis whatsoever against the finance minister, then 2 weeks later today withdraw that case and not understand that that's a big deal, will probably send a lot of investors cause a lot of concern to those investors. So it is indeed a possibility that entities, individuals or organizations may well choose to say to the General Counsel of the Bar that Advocate Shaun Abrahams has not acquitted himself as an advocate. He is simply unfit and improper to be practicing. And we will see in the coming days whether or not that happens or not.
All right, outstanding reporting as always and analysis. Our senior specialist reporter, Karyn Maughan there.